At the base of Montpinçon, B Squadron was ordered by Major Dagrug Price to prepare for its ascent through the mist to the top.
He must have got a bearing, a compass bearing, onto the top of the hill from the people who were already up there. So, of course, he came across to me and he said, "Here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to walk in front of your tank with a compass." And I said, "Oh, isn't that a bit risky? There might still be a lot of Boche around on the way up." And he said, "No, I don't think there are." And, but he said, I've got the bearing, which should bring us out somewhere near where the tanks are, at the top. So I said, "Okay." And I said, "What about the interference with the compass point from the metal of our tank?" He said, "Well, I thought of that." He said, I'll keep ahead about 15, 20 yards ahead of you." So I thought it was a very brave thing to have done.
So B Squadron proceeded up the mountain in a manner that was very much in keeping with the spirit of the day.
And then apparently, although I think we were more or less all of us quite unaware of this, although we knew the Germans were not very far away and people had heard the Germans talking on the top, a counterattack was mounted by them to push us off the top. But they lost their way in the fog, which came down pretty heavily and stayed right until dawn next morning. And, but it wasn't until first light next morning that the shelling began again, because I don't think they'd got themselves sorted out. The opposition hadn't. And then I remember a very hairy morning when we were shelled all the time. And that went on, I can't remember at what time of day. We were withdrawn to a sort of rear rally, which was still on the mountain, but some way back. But that didn't seem to get us out of the shelling either. We still got shelled there. But remarkably, we had comparatively few, if any, casualties of note.
With Captain Peace now out of action, Brigade ordered the 4th Wiltshires under Colonel Luce to go to the top of Montpinçon, while the 5th Wiltshires were to stay and defend the crossroads at La Barinière.
Ted Luce had been listening into our battle. These are his own words, he told me later. And when the brigadier told him to go and get Montpinçon any way he liked, but suggested a certain route, he gave the classic answer, "Thank you very much, I'll go where my friends are." Now this is interesting because, as you have heard from Dim, it meant a very long and exhausting march for them to come around through our positions, but I think it probably demonstrates the trust, perhaps, which the battalions had developed in each other, that he reckoned that where we made the break was a place for him to reinforce.
We found a track, not right through 5 Wiltshires, but beside them, which led up to the top. And the commanding officer went up somehow. Night was falling, it was difficult, very rough country, and we really didn't know where the other 2 battalions were.
Colonel Luce realized that we were held up, the whole battalion was held up, and something drastic had to be done, and he took over as the leading man of the leading section. And you can imagine the morale of the battalion with your commanding officer having the courage and wonder to do that. And he led the way up. And then, was halfway up, he was suddenly confronted with a couple of chaps, Germans, with a machine gun. And in his fluent German, which consisted of shouting English in a very loud voice, they surrendered.
And so we started off, we went up a different way, we wandered up, all up over the hills, and Sergeant Jenkins, he was in charge of 10 platoon, and I had my section. So we wandered up, and it was still getting misty, so we wandered up, and gradually got up to the top and seen what a couple of tanks were up there, and bits and pieces left everywhere. and we managed to get to the top about some after 10 o'clock at night. Of course, the mist were coming down, you couldn't see far, but you could hear the Germans a bit further on digging or doing the same. So we dug in, you know, as best we could. We didn't have a lot of opposition. We more or less walked up over the hill, well, fatigued. I mean, we had breakfast and that were about the lot.
They were very tired, because the 4th Wilts, as well as what was left of the 5th, had been under extreme pressure for nearly 2 days non-stop. And they were extremely hungry. So as usual, our regiment fed them, because we always had plenty of compo packs and plenty of spare food aboard. And they were always very surprised, because first thing, we were talking hot cups of tea from our pressure cookers, which kept their morale up considerably.
The Germans did send patrols back that night to find out what we were up to. To my dismay, horror, when early light came next day, a German patrol had got into my company lines undetected and had actually captured my 2 signallers who were in the trench next to me. 5 yards. It could have been whoever it was with me, it may have been Sergeant Major. I got up in the morning, I said to the signal, shouted across the signal, contact battalion headquarters. Nothing. Went over to see that they were asleep. Nothing there except their sets. Fascinating.
And then eventually we got relieved the next day. In the morning. I suppose we had some breakfast. I don't know if we had any breakfast up there or not. But so then we more or less come back down, and as we were coming back down, the cooks and the HQ company had been shelled at the bottom, getting back towards this crossroads. So we come back to the crossroads, and eventually I suppose we must have moved off and had a bit of a quieter time.